Welcome into the Paul Kuharsky podcast. Happy to get to talk Titans with you right away before I get on a flight to London, which is exciting, except for the forecast part of London. We're going to talk about the red zone. We're going to talk about defensive coaches on offense and how their offenses do. Chigakonkwo and Traylon Burks' development, where Kevin Byard is. But I buried the lead because we're going to talk about it with Mike Herndon, who you should know from his weekly column at paulkuharsky.com. Plus Football and Other F Words, another fine podcast. And without any hesitation, we'll pop Mike right in here if I could hit the right button. How you doing, Mike? Thanks for the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing great. And always fun to talk ball here.
Overdue to have you on. A lot of people have asked for it. And I think we've got a lot of ground to cover. Your piece on Wednesday was about the Titans' red zone struggle. So I wanted to start there and get into what's going on. This team, it's been a hallmark as much as anything of Mike Vrabel's Titans, that they get touchdowns when they get inside the 20-yard line to a high degree. And right now that has been flipped inside out, 35.3%, tied for 29th in the league. I think it's 6 in 17. You might know, can be able to confirm that number off the top of your head.
Yeah, that's correct.
Based on what you just did, really, really poor. They haven't thrown to DeAndre Hopkins down there as he's emerged as clearly their best option. It's easy to second guess it, but if I'm going to throw to him one time in a game down there, I'd like my quarterback to be the guy throwing to him, not my running back. If I'm not mistaken, the other attempt maybe was also a trick play, the only other throw for him in the red zone this season.
Yeah, I think it was actually because he's been targeted. He's been targeted 6 times. He's got 2 catches in the red zone. But yeah, one of them was Henry. Did they run another Henry throw for him?
I have trouble. I was counting on your better recall than mine, but it's okay that we both don't recall because there's been so much ugly stuff. The brain filters it out after a time. But so they haven't thrown to him enough down there.
Right.
Derrick Henry hasn't generated many of his good runs down there. And just this element of their identity has really fizzled. After you wrote this piece, what were your conclusions as to the key components?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is, one, we're working with a pretty small sample size right now, obviously, 17 trips. Things could even out. And I do think there's been some where, Myles Garrett just completely wrecked a couple of these things and not a ton that they could do about it, to be honest. I mean, they
could have doubled. They could have Dillard help on the one play before halftime.
Could have helped Dillard there, which that still would have only got him a field goal, I think, because I'm not sure they had anyone open really on that play, anyways. They could have thrown it to Westbrook, but he was short of the goal line. If he'd been tackled inbounds, clock would have ran out. But I really went through in detail in that piece those sequences that failed. There's 10 of them really, because one of the 11 failures was a end of game kneel down situation against Cincy. So the 10 failures in looking at who is at fault, it's really a mixed bag. I mean, there's some that are clearly on Tannehill. There's some that I feel like, are penalty related. They've got far too many penalties in the red zone. I think Aaron Brewer's been at fault for a couple of those. Chigakonkwo had one this past week. So they can't afford to be behind the sticks, period. Just the way that this offense is built, unfortunately. And they found themselves in that situation too often in the red zone this year. And then the other big element of it, and I think this may be the biggest difference from years past, is Derrick Henry is not generating yards in short area this season. And that's not all Derrick Henry's fault, most likely. I think it has something to do with they're a lighter offensive line across the board this year than they have been in years past. Even as much as Dennis Daly was maligned here, I think he was actually a decent run blocker. That wasn't a good enough reason for him to stay in the lineup. But Andre Dillard isn't generating as much push to me as Dennis Daly is on a regular basis last season. So I think they're not getting as much push. I think he's been losing steps. I don't think this is he's fallen off a cliff thing. I think he's coming back to the pack a little bit from just an explosiveness standpoint. I think he's still running hard. He's still pushing piles from time to time, but I just don't think he's been as successful. And the numbers bear it out. I mean, he's averaging 1.1 yards per attempt inside the red zone this year. In years past, your yards per attempt in the red zone is always going to be less because of goal line, because of short yardage situation. You're not going to break long runs, all that. But in years past, from 2019 to 2022, he was averaging over 3 yards a carry in the red zone. So this is a big drop off in effectiveness for their short run game effectiveness, and that's been something that they've relied on a ton. I mean, Derrick Henry scored, he's nearing 100 NFL rushing touchdowns, which would put him in the top 10 of all time among running backs. That's been their weapon in the red zone. That's been part of the reason that they've ranked first, second, fifth, and sixth over the past 4 years in red zone efficiency. And to suddenly drop all the way down to, I guess, fourth from last is pretty stunning change in 1 year.
We'll get into Henry more broadly in a bit. The other thing I think hurts them in the red zone, it hurts them everywhere, but this inability to separate generally.
Yeah.
So Hopkins is probably a better receiver between the 20s because, the lack of separation is less of a big deal when you're dealing with more space, even though the windows are tight and he's a pattern craftsman and all of that stuff. Well, you can make do with that stuff better when there's more space. And when all the space shrinks, that's the reason they needed to call a play, or Mike Vrabel felt they needed to call the play we're talking about where Dillard was singled up on Garrett, is because they needed to get more people out in Cleveland to try to throw a touchdown pass on that one play before they were going to kick the field goal. And when they're fielding a bunch of non-separators, if you can't separate in major space, in middle of the field space, well, it's going to be that much more difficult to separate in tight space. And they haven't proven that they can do that. And so while they are able at times to get the most out of Nick Westbrook-Akine and get the most out of Chris Moore, who's done fantastically well with his limited opportunities, get the most out of Hopkins, they don't seem to yet have figured it out. They're without Burks more often than not, almost, it feels like now. Kyle Phillips was really eased back in, but he's the kind of guy with that short area quickness who should be a factor down there, but didn't get really any meaningful chances. Here's the other thing that drives me crazy, and tell me how you feel about this. They come out of that game, they had 4 red zone chances. They got a 19-yard touchdown from Spears, right? And they kicked field goals on the other 3. But they get the offensive pass interference penalty against Chigakonkwo. And all they talk about after the game is, well, we got ourselves behind the sticks. When we get ourselves behind the sticks, it's really difficult, blah, blah, blah. All right, well, you're talking about 1/3 of the time, and you're completely ignoring the other 2 times where you were in a regular 1st and 10 and had normal set of downs with another chance to get another first down and to proceed with your offense. Why is everything eclipsed by the one series where you had the 1st and 20? And they talk, Mike, so much about being behind the sticks and 1st and 15 and 1st and 20 or 2nd and 18 or whatever they're in. I think it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that they're going to get in those, or that they're just obsessed by those, that even when they're in 1st and 10, they're thinking, well, it's going to be 2nd and 15 or it's going to be 3rd and 10. I just don't understand why they obsess about it so much. Okay, you got the 1st and 20. If you want to call that a wash and you're not going to be able to overcome it, and you want to say that from the start, that's fine. What about the other 2 series? Right. Did they not exist?
And it drives me crazy as well, the way that they speak about staying on schedule in the offense, which I will give them that it is important to stay on schedule, especially the way that they're built. But they're allowed to get first downs on 1st and 2nd down. Like they seem to target, like, their goal. A great series for them is like it ends up 3rd and 3. That's not what you should want out of first and
Right.
second down. You
Yeah,
should
if
want
they threw
first
an
downs.
11-yard pass on 1st and 10, it's almost like they want to back up to get to 3rd and 2 because that we don't know what to do with the quick first down.
Yeah, they just don't, they seem so intent on using all of their downs to pick up, and picking it up at, turning in their homework right as it's due, right? It drives me crazy the way they talk about that, because I do think that's a mentality thing, and that they're not as aggressive in attacking downfield sometimes because they are so intent. And that's what, the stat was posted around on Twitter today of second down run rate after an incomplete pass on first down. And the Titans, again, are like one of the top 4 teams in the league at doing that. It's so predictable. And I'd have to go back and chart their actual success with that. I know sometimes, they might pick up 2 or 3, but 3rd and 8 isn't a desirable situation either. I'd just assume rather have a chance at 3rd and 10 or a chance at a first down, rather
Yeah,
than
right.
almost guaranteeing myself 3rd and 7 or 8. I mean, that to me is not what your goal should be. It just feels like they are so scared to death of this 3rd and long situation, which I understand with the protection. They are scared to death of being in that spot, but they can't. They call plays as if they're scared of that situation, and I think it affects their mentality, and I think it affects the way that they play offense generally.
Yeah, we're on the same page there. Cherry on top here of the red zone conversation. The Ravens defense has allowed 3 points per red zone drive this season, tied for the best in the league. So, and they went to London on Monday. So they're not going to be jet lagged. Last time they were there, they had guys falling asleep on the bus on the way to the game. And Harbaugh
Oh
said
my
he wasn't going to
God.
let that happen again. So they went much earlier, the earliest anybody's gone in a long time. I think maybe the earliest ever. So if the Titans are going to solve the red zone problem, they're going to do it against the defense that's very good down there. I want to extend what we were talking about with Henry into the identity conversation. I don't want to say they need to force it to Derek, but they need to be more reliant on Derek in order to have any identity on offense. Or if they're going to create a new identity, they ought to get started. In the
Right.
same way on defense, to me, it all starts with the front 4. It's really the front 3.5 right now, the way Landry's playing. He had 1 big sack against the Chargers, and he knocked Anthony Richardson out for potentially 2 months. So he's made 2 very notable plays, but he's not himself at all.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys hit the quarterback twice in Indianapolis, which is hugely concerning. It better be an aberration. And I understand how you want to get Spears involved in the game, and that you may take Derek off the field more often. And there have been plenty of games where I thought they've gone too far the other way. But how do they find a happy medium here where they sustain their identity and push the envelope towards some new stuff offensively? Because I don't think they have any idea who they are right now. And when guys don't, I think you're just asking for trouble.
Yeah, I do feel like there's like a little bit of an identity crisis going on here with this team, just because it does feel like it's a transitional year. With the contract situations for Henry and Tannehill, and all that's kind of lingering out there, and their replacements kind of already being here. At least in the Titans' mind, the replacements are already here. I think it's an interesting year from a psychology standpoint of the locker room, of the players, of the veterans, particularly. But then also, Henry's also having the worst start to his career since he became the bell cow back for this franchise, really in 2018, the end of 2018. He's at 3.8 yards per carry through 5 games. That is the worst out of that stretch. And yes, he's a notorious slow starter to the season, but this is slow even for him. And I don't think the light kicked on late like it did, or last year like it has in previous seasons. I felt like, I kept waiting for that Derrick Henry to hit his stride and start ripping off 100-yard, 150-yard, 2-touchdown games, and it never came last year. Now injuries were a part of that and everything else like that, but I feel like he is taking steps back, and I do think Spears has shown enough that I understand why they want to get him the ball. Like, he touches the ball, he makes the electric things happen a good amount of the time. So, um, but it's kind of a team that feels like it's torn between two paths. One being more of a pass first and versatile offense, and the one that they've been for the past 5 years, that's been a Derrick Henry centric offense that has brought them a lot of success. So, um, it kind of feels like they need to choose a path here, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. But I don't know that they are feeling that, because I feel like maybe they go in with the plan, but then they get in the moment and they call what they think is the right thing in the moment, which I can't blame them for. Um, but I also think, I wrote this thing early in the season: is Spears going to ultimately hurt Derrick Henry's Hall of Fame case, which I got destroyed for. I don't think it's, Spears the person, it's Spears
Right.
the concept.
Hmm.
But, if this is the trend, it's definitely happening. I mean, and his numbers aren't going to skyrocket next year here or somewhere else with the volume that he needs. If the volume is down like this, his production is going to slow, and he needs more production to get himself, a stronger case for the Hall of Fame. I know that's a ways off, but a lot of people think he's automatic, and he's not automatic. I
Yeah, I
want
don't
to
think
ask
he's there
you,
yet.
sorry?
I said no. I agree. I don't think he's there yet. I think he needs to get to that minimum 10,000 yards, 100 touchdown
Yeah, minimum.
combination, and
And
then
that's
probably do
not
a little
as
bit more.
guaranteed as it was on opening day, right? We would have said he's getting those two, no problem.
Yeah,
And now you look at it and you think, well, I think 12 would be a lot more comfortable number, and 12 is certainly no guarantee.
yeah.
Let me have the screen to myself here. So I'm here to tell you about Zen Sports, the primary sponsor of the Paul Kuharsky podcast. It's the new sports betting app in Tennessee that's revolutionizing sports betting rewards. You're wasting your time and your money if you're betting on any other sports book. Zen Sports offers real cash rewards for those lucky enough to be in Tennessee, and that means no funny money, no points, or no credits. Zen Sports offers a cash rebate on your bets, similar to how you earn cash rewards with certain credit cards. For a welcome bonus, you earn 5% cash back on every bet you place for your first 15 days, with no limits on your bonus when you use the referral bonus code TN Paul, all capital letters TN Paul. Then you earn up to 3% cash back on your bets after that with the Zen Sports Cash Loyalty Program. If you're not a member of paulkuharsky.com, with that code TN Paul, once you make your first $10 bet, you get a free membership to paulkuharsky.com for all the best Titans coverage, analysis, and news. It's a great deal all along. Make the switch today. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-889-9789. Terms and conditions apply. You must be 21 and in Tennessee to bet. Now we go back to Mike Herndon. I was looking at this, and you're far more a statistical guy than I am. So I want you to tell me if there's meaning to it. I was looking at, because we're always talking about Vrabel as a defensive coach, dealing with the offensive coordinator thing. If he gets a good offensive coordinator and the guy's good for 2 years, odds are he loses that good offensive coordinator to a head coaching job, and then he's got to do it again. So LaFleur wasn't even that good. He lost him. Arthur Smith was good for 2 years. He lost him. He's now starting anew with Tim Kelly. So I looked at defensive coaches, how their units have fared on offense, and offensive coaches and how their units have fared on defense over 3 years. So 2021 full season, 2022 full season, and this season so far, 33% of offensive coaches have had top 10 defenses, and 22% of defensive coaches have had top 10 offenses. So to me, that's not skewed that much.
Hmm.
But if we cut it down just to last year and this year, which is obviously a smaller sample size, 37% of the offensive head coaches have had top 10 defenses, and only 8.3% of the defensive coaches have had top 10 offenses. And those are pretty much accounted for by Josh Allen and Justin Herbert.
Yeah.
You put much into that?
Yeah. I guess I do, in the fact that I think if you don't have a franchise quarterback, having an offensive guru like a Kyle Shanahan, who can take a Brock Purdy, and I think Purdy is a plenty talented guy, but what he's done with Purdy has been nothing short of miraculous in turning him into the player that he is now. And I think that's not to take away from Purdy himself, but I think that system does him a lot of favors. And I think Tua is another example. Mike McDaniel goes to Miami. They have a very clear offensive vision that they basically want to put a track team out on the field around Tua, and McDaniel's creative and able to create a system where Tua can thrive. After Tua looked like, he was, Dolphins fans were beside themselves that they didn't take Justin Herbert for several years, and maybe Herbert still ends up being the better passer in the long run, but Tua's putting up ridiculous production now because he's got a good offensive coach and good offensive weapons around him. So I do think that there's something to that. Now, we've seen the marriage of a defensive head coach with an elite quarterback do incredible things in this league. When you think about Mike Tomlin and Ben Roethlisberger, obviously Belichick and Brady being the biggest example, Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson during their heyday. There's John Harbaugh and I guess he hasn't really had the
I didn't
elite
count
quarterback,
Harbaugh
but
or Judge as
yeah, I
anything. I
guess
threw them out as special teamers.
yeah, they're kind of middle of the road. But I guess non-offensive specialist coaches. But yeah, I do think if you don't have that quarterback to go with them, it becomes very difficult because it just seems like there's no stability on the offense because you're probably changing quarterbacks every few years and changing coordinators every few years. And there's no stability there. There's nothing to build off of for that. So I do think that there's something to that. For the vast majority of teams that don't have that franchise quarterback.
Another thing I thought was maybe a little bit interesting. I think about Norv Turner sometimes, and it seems to me there are fewer Norv Turners. Maybe I'm wrong, but there are fewer Norv Turners. The offensive coordinator position has really become the feeder position for head coaches. A lot of young up and comers. Meanwhile, like a third of the league's defensive coordinators are former head coaches. Fangio, Schwartz, Bradley, Joseph, Spagnuolo, Quinn, Del Rio, Flores, Morris, Wilkes. So if you're an offensive head coach, you can almost get like a head coach defense if you need one. They're out there. And it's not so much the case on offense, though there are certainly failed offensive coaches who do become available, but they're not hot commodities necessarily in the same way. I'm thinking of Adam Gase.
Yeah,
for
that's the
example,
name that jumped
right?
in my mind too. Nathaniel Hackett.
You don't want to connect yourself to Adam Gase.
Yeah.
You want him out of there. Quick word about my other sponsor, Jasper's. If you're watching on YouTube, you see it above my head. I know Mike has partaken of their food, and I imagine their drink. Great place on West End between downtown and Midtown. Great menu, great drinks, free parking, which is hard to find anywhere. You can slide in there, get the bolognese, the Cuban sandwich are my two favorites. You can play some Pop-A-Shot, some air hockey, bunch of free games. Great place for a business lunch, great place for a date, great place for a family meal. Very affordable, great service, great food. Can't recommend it highly enough. Stop by Jasper's. They've been a good supporter of mine for some time. Let's return the favor. West End between downtown and Midtown. Did I mention there is free parking? I wrote a little bit today to go in conjunction with this podcast about the lack of development of Traylon Burks and Chig Okonkwo. This was one of the big storylines of the offseason. These two guys, Chig had a promising season where his 3 yards of yak over expected in his rookie season was the best number in the league. He was going to grow on that. Burks had figured out his asthma. He was in better condition. He spent his offseason in Nashville. He rented a prop plane because he couldn't get back for the third stage of OTAs. He was so determined to be here. Now, he probably, it seems like, going to miss his third game in a row with this knee injury. He didn't practice on Wednesday. Chig is called on a lot to block, which isn't his forte, but he's not been dynamic at all. doesn't look instinctive out there. These two guys have added virtually nothing outside of that 70-yard pass to Burks in the Chargers game that really got the Titans going, their big offensive outburst. Should we have foreseen this? How naive were we? And how much do you think they can still bring?
Yeah, I mean, I was optimistic about both these guys too coming into the season, just because I thought they did show flashes. And Okonkwo's per snap, per route run numbers were absolutely absurd last year. I mean, he, from an efficiency standpoint, he didn't get used a ton until very late in the season, and even then, it probably felt like they were leaving some meat on the bone there.
And we were asking Downing about that every week, and he said,
Yeah.
"Yeah, we're going to use him more." And then we'd ask him the next week, "Well, what about now?" Yeah.
I mean, it seemed like every time he touched the ball last year, he was making a big play, and this year it just does not feel the same. He's had drops when he has caught the ball. He's not breaking tackles. I mean, I think about one of the red zone plays that I highlighted in the piece today. That play action boot. Tannehill rolls back out left. Chig catches the pass. He's got a little bit of room now. The linebacker Zaire Franklin takes a good angle, makes a very good tackle. But I just feel like if you get Okonkwo in space against a linebacker, that is what you want right there. You want him in space against a linebacker with a little bit of room to turn upfield and make a move. And he just didn't. He just kind of turned into the tackle and went down for a 2-yard gain. And it just does not feel the same, like he's an explosive play waiting to happen as it did last year. And Burks, the injury disappointment aside, I've been disappointed with him on the field as well. Now, there's probably some, Tannehill's probably had him open a few times where he should have hit him or could have hit him that would change this statistical production. But I also just don't, he's had too many drops too. I mean, he had was it Cleveland where he had felt like 3 or 4 drops in that game. And some of those were potentially big plays. So I think it's disappointing from both guys so far. They could still turn it around, obviously. But it is kind of a good reminder that, we always look at development as linear, and that, well, this guy was this good in year 1, so he's going to be this good times X in year 2. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes guys take a step back before they take a step forward. Sometimes they take a step back and never recover, so it's, and that's why I was a little bit, down on the team as a whole for most of the offseason. I kind of feel bad that I let the DeAndre Hopkins signing kind of change my thinking of this team, and he's been fantastic, ironically, but I might have been too high on them before the Hopkins thing, I guess maybe is the way I should look at it. Because my concern was that all this was projection. It was all projection. It was asking guys to do stuff that they've never shown that they could do before at that volume. Because everybody was stepping up a level. Backups were becoming starters. Starters were asked to become stars. And outside of Tannehill and Henry, nobody had the skins on the wall to show that, hey, yes, you can rely on me to do this job. And yeah, it's kind of come to pass that most of these guys have fallen short of what I think the Titans were thinking and hoping that they would be.
The one area that I made a bad calculation was I thought, well, the receivers, even after Hopkins showed up, not a group that's going to get good separation, but Chig can get separation on the matchups that you're talking about. And Spears, with his speed, can get some separation. Well, that plays into this stat that I have. Spears, and I did say that I thought Spears would get more carries than people expected and fewer catches than people expected. People were projecting crazy amounts of targets for him. He didn't catch the ball that much at Tulane. Better looking target than people they'd had, but Hilliard was a good target. And, so Spears has averaged 4.5 yards per reception, which is the 4th worst of qualified running backs in the NFL. Meanwhile, Henry has averaged 11.2 yards per reception, which is tied for the best of 41 qualified running backs, which is not the way most of us expected it would go. And Derek, we all know, can break off a really big one when they set him up nicely. What was his long one? Maybe in the 40s. 40 to
Yeah, yeah, he had a long one against the Saints, I know. I think that was in the 40-yard range. But
which
yeah, I do think they're used completely differently,
sure.
obviously, in the pass game. Henry, I was looking at it before we jumped on here. Henry's average depth of target this season is minus 3.7 yards. So 3.7 yards behind the line of scrimmage. And they've been running that little flare pass that I talked about in the piece today, too, in that high red zone area that I think they've kind of overworked at
I
this
do
point. It
too.
worked early, but now they've shown it like 5, 6, 7 times, and they do dress it up in different ways. But I think teams are onto that, and the Colts certainly were not, uh, fooled whatsoever by those looks coming in the high red zone area. But yeah, Henry, his average depth of target is almost a yard behind the next lowest running back. So he is purely a screen guy, and he's great on the screens. He really has become a good screen back, which I wasn't sure would ever be a big part of his repertoire either. But yeah, Spears, of course, they use more as a receiver at times in those circle routes out of the backfield on third downs and things like that. And I think he's been relatively effective, but I honestly would like to see him get some screen opportunities here and there as well,
Yeah,
because I think his
he can
shifty
be
does.
better as a pass target, especially
Yeah,
considering what they've been lacking. I think he could definitely be better used and have better results. Finally, on the offensive line, um, I thought certainly the results were far better against Indianapolis. Blake Bedingfield didn't think that they played all that well. He thought Skoronski certainly was rusty coming back from 3 missed games with the appendix. Mike Vrabel made it clear on Wednesday that Nicholas Petit-Frere is not getting his job back over Chris Hubbard. Hubbard's done admirable work, but with help, and
yeah,
so our standards change now. Like I like what Chris Hubbard's done, but I know he's getting help a good percentage of the time, and we know Dillard's getting help a very high percentage of the time. So you got a lot of routes that have 3 people to start anyway, and chippers at the very least coming out late, who again they're not going to have very high depth of target. You wrote in the last couple of weeks about like the possible alternative line shapes if the Titans decide to change. I think it's less and less likely. With Skoronski back in the lineup, Dillard has some comfort inside now,
hmm
can focus a little bit more outside. And their tendency is to kind of stick with the guy until he really, really proves that he can't do anything. I guess their options now are a little bit better than they were last year when they were looking for help with Dennis Daly playing so badly. But if you had to forecast it, what do you think the chances are if they continue to play like as they've played the last 2 weeks that we see something happen with Dillard?
yeah. I mean, Dillard hasn't played super well the last 2 weeks. I don't think he's been good by any means, but I think he's stabilized a little bit. And part of that's just not having to deal with Myles Garrett anymore. Although, the Bengals had a good pass rusher in Trey Hendrickson, and the Colts, they were without Quiddy Pay, which helped, I think, a little bit. But I think he's stabilized somewhat. He hasn't been just destroying drives single handedly like he was in the first 4 weeks. So maybe I think they probably stick with him for a little bit longer, and his leash probably extends past the bye week at this point, even if he struggles a little bit against Baltimore, whose defense has been a big surprise to me as far as how good they've been. I thought they kind of lacked some of the horses that they used to have, but they just seem to turn them up, every
Yeah,
season.
whoever's on the outside for the Ravens will effectively rush the passer. It's kind of
Yeah.
one of the rules of the NFL.
Absolutely. So I think it'll be Dillard for a little while longer, anyways. But do you think there's any hope of a relief for Christian Fulton?
I was thinking that I can't. I do think there's a chance that they pull him. I think it's more likely that they would package him, and come up with something where he plays less and
hmm
Avery was in something. So maybe he'd play just first down or or something like that, and that they would have him step down a little bit and focus really on one thing. I could see that happening. I think he just needs a mental break more than anything, and so that's the only reason I could really see it happening this week. If you give him this week, and then they got the bye week, and you send them away and say clear your head and come back. Um, but I mean, my God, it's really been bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, you also have to look at Trey Avery. I mean, Trey Avery played in the opener for who? Who was out? Or no, he played the second week for
Second,
Fulton,
yeah.
right? Fulton
Yep.
was out, and the Chargers went after him pretty well
Yeah,
and
mercilessly. Yeah,
and
15 targets, I
victimized
think it
him.
was.
So, I know fans are huge on the get Fulton out of there. It can't be worse train. Um, and I guess it can't be worse, but I don't think Trey Avery's going to light it up by any means. So it's hard to know how Vrabel thinks on that. I think if you pull him, you lose him probably, and that's
Yeah.
the danger in terms of you're going to need him at some point, probably.
Do you think there's any chance we see Caleb Farley later on? At
I
any
think
point this
Caleb
season?
Farley is done and buried. I don't know what happens to him beyond this year. Is this his third year?
This is his third year, yeah.
Third year. So they got a decision to make after this. I don't think he sees his way off of PUP this year. I think he's buried there, and I don't think it has anything to do with the condition of his back.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's a sad situation all around with him at this point.
He's been a regular in the locker room, but I mean, this was a microdiscectomy, like his. I think he's had two other back surgeries. One of them was more serious. My wife's had a microdiscectomy. She's not a football player, obviously, or getting back to a serious athletic life, but and his could have been more serious or whatever. But there's been a lot of time, a lot of time, and I think most people, unless it's some super level of serious, he's been through the rehab attached to that already. I don't know where it was in his back compared to the other one. If they're close by, it could lead to a fusion, and that might be a different story.
Mm-hmm.
But I would think he would be close to ready or beyond ready by now. And I have reason to suspect it's not about his back.
Yeah. It's too bad. I mean, at this point, I think he's a guy that you almost just, if you get anything out of him ever, it's a huge bonus. But
I think he's a guy who's happy that Isaiah Wilson exists because he doesn't top the list of busts. He's only close to the top of the list of busts.
Yeah.
Which is a heck of a list. You put out the tweet this week about how little they've gotten out of their top 3 rounds of the last 4 years.
4 years, yeah. So, and the reason I picked 4 years, I mean, that's basically everyone that should be on a rookie contract out of that group. And you look, and you've got 14 guys on that list. 2 of them are starters that are playing well. It's that can't be your hit rate. You can't go 2 for 14 on guys who are actually contributing in a positive way as a starter.
And then you're chasing those spots. I mean, we've talked plenty about chasing the offensive line and chasing the cornerback. I'm just thinking of Darrington Evans, whose name is on that list. Well, if Darrington Evans was what you thought he would be, then you wouldn't have needed Tyjae Spears. And then you could do something else with that pick and address entirely different spots than cornerback and offensive line and third down running back. Or
maybe Juwan Jones or Jalen Hyatt's on this team instead of Spears, because Evans is Spears. Right. But yeah, it does have just a huge ripple effect. And I think when you look at it like that, there's just no mystery as to why this roster is the way it is today. They just don't. They missed on way too many drafts in a row, and you just can't have that happen.
And people ask how long John Robinson's imprint lasts on this team. And I think some of them think I'm being unfair when I say it, but because Spears replaces Evans, John's imprint really lasts as long as a guy like Spears is on the roster. as long as a guy like Petit Frere is on the roster, as long as a guy like Traylon Burks is on the roster. And if Traylon Burks kind of busts, then it's really on the roster as long as the solutions for Traylon Burks are on the roster.
Right. Yeah.
It's a long, long ripple.
It is.
Long ripple. And that's how bad teams or mediocre teams stay bad. And as much shit and grief as people want to give Mike Vrabel right now, and I don't think he's doing his best work right now, the roster handcuff is the biggest thing that's going on with this team. And your tweet there summing up that 2 for 14 spells it out as well. And look, everybody's excited. They got $90 million or whatever they have next year. Well, guess what doesn't make it to market? Premier left tackles, elite cornerbacks, right? Wide receivers with great speed. What are the top 3 things you'd give the Titans if you could give them things? Those 3 things. Guess where they have to come from? The draft.
Exactly.
Guess what? They traded away their 3rd round pick next year for, the guy that may or may not be their quarterback. And
they've got
on and on we go with the same story.
6 picks next year. Half of them are in the 7th round. So
and one of them they traded for the guy who destroyed him at left tackle last year, Dennis.
Yeah. And
Mike, it's been great visiting with you. Yeah, he's terrific. Is he playing in Arizona? Has he gotten any snaps?
I'm not even sure. I haven't kept up, unfortunately.
There's one we'll check on and give you a Twitter update on. Mike Herndon writes at paulkuharski.com on Wednesdays. Why don't you give people the schedule for football and other F words and whatever else you do?
Yeah, so we'll be doing our podcast actually tonight, Wednesday night. We'll be doing a late night episode of that, but generally every Wednesday in your podcast feed of choice.
There you go. So you got back-to-back podcasts to listen to. We don't care what order, just hit them both up. He and Zach did a great job over there, and it's definitely something you should be checking out if it's not already on your list. Read him here, and I'll leave him on screen while I say don't block the box, and be sure to lock your locks. Check out Zen Sports and Jaspers. Thanks, everybody.